So the goal of President Biden and of Dr. Fauci and of many health experts is to get 80% of the population vaccinated before we're safe, before we have enough immunity. Yet 30% of all Americans say they're not going to get the vaccine. Are they justified, and why can't we talk about it? It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Monday Night Rob Nelson Live, interactive live streaming coming at you from our non-sponsored studios in Florida. As you can see, we have these beautiful non-sponsored studios on both coasts. It's the power of the green screen, my friends. And going to you wherever you are, on whatever social platform you're listening on, and whatever state, country, or green screen you're listening on. Let's jump right in. So this is a conversation I want to have today with you guys that I think is a conversation America needs to be having. And it's about the vaccine. I want to be really clear. This is not an anti-vaccine conversation. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not against vaccines. In theory, I'm not against them. And I'm not against the COVID vaccine. Let's be honest. A vaccine is the only way a pandemic stops, right? I mean, 2 years ago, the flu killed 60,000 Americans. That was with a vaccine. If we didn't have a vaccine, you know how many more people would be dying of the flu every year? The numbers would be astronomical. When you have a rapid infectious disease, the only way you stop it is a combination of a vaccine and a herd immunity. Herd immunity can come to some extent from people building up tolerance from getting it, but at some level, vaccine, polio would still be rampant if we had had a vaccine. Who are we kidding? When people say vaccines don't work, they're wrong. Vaccines do work. Vaccines work. Vaccines stop diseases, all kinds of diseases. Full disclosure, I was not vaccinated as a kid, not because my parents were afraid of autism, but I actually think I'm high on the autism scale anyway, because I was raised in a religion called Christian Science, and many Christian scientists didn't practice going to doctors or using medicine. So I had no vaccines my entire childhood. I went through everything. I survived everything you could survive, basically. I had I did no tetanus shot. I jumped on rusty nails, got tetanus. I got infections. I got scarlet fever, chicken pox, measles, mumps, you name it. I had it. But I did get vaccinated when I was a young adult before I went to China. Had to get vaccinated to make that trip. And no regrets about it at all. Like, I was happy to get vaccinated. Shoot me up. I do believe my lack of vaccinations as a kid might have probably helped my immune system, because the reality is, right, when you just have to deal with infections, your body develops an immunity. That's the herd immunity side. But you can't count on everybody doing that. And the notion that everybody's just going to go no vaccine. And again, I don't want to get into the anti-vaxxing arguments in general. There's people who argue vaccines are bad, or, they're going to give you autism or whatever. And I'm even going to go there. I'm just going to say, to be straightforward, a vaccine for a pandemic is like the best solution you could hope for. And we whipped one out, hate Trump or not. And it annoys me that Biden can't give credit for that. I've already said that. Big leaders give credit where credit's due. You can hate Trump, but he and his administration and the pharmaceutical community fast-tracked like we've never seen fast-tracking to get COVID vaccinations out in a year. And it was remarkable. I mean, people didn't think we'd be able to get it. And we did. We got 2 of them, and now a third coming in the U.S. and others outside of the U.S., right? So you got a Pfizer vaccine, you got a Moderna vaccine. Now you got a Johnson & Johnson vaccine. You got the AstraZeneca vaccine, which we'll talk about in a minute. That's having some issues. But, multiple vaccines that are out there for people to get. So the goal is get as many people vaccinated as possible. Realistic, a totally understandable and justifiable goal. 100%. The question I want to bring up is why people aren't allowed to have a real conversation about whether they want to get the vaccine or not. The entire movement to get you to get vaccinated is one that the president and the leadership in the national health community have decided we want everyone to get vaccinated. So we're going to tell everybody you got to do it. And we're going to tell everybody it's fine and safe to do it. And you're not really allowed to ask questions. You're not really allowed to say, maybe, well, is it safe? No, just shut up. It is. Got a problem with that. Facebook has been openly acknowledging that they are going to make Monkey, I'm making fun of my hair. Facebook is openly acknowledging that I like to go back and forth with my loyal audience. Facebook has openly said, we want to encourage the vaccine. Now, Facebook has also acknowledged that they are a major source of health information for millions and millions of people. Probably more than millions. They have 3 billion users. Hundreds of millions of people rely on Facebook for health information. And Facebook takes it very seriously. And they take the misinformation aspect of it very seriously too, going, we are going to block obvious misinformation around COVID and around the vaccines. I understand that. Again, I have my issues with the power these platforms wield, but I understand them wanting to not have, it's a pandemic that's wiping us out. Like, I get them wanting to go, how can we do our part? And Facebook actually did a study to try to understand where the vaccination or the resistance to vaccination was coming from. Got just a little poster here for you. Poster headline. It's a headline poster. How does vaccine hesitancy spread on Facebook? Study shows small group has an outsized influence. So Facebook did this study, and in it, I'm going to wear the glasses on my head, you guys. Is that all right? Facebook went through where it comes from and why. And what they discovered was that the majority of anti-vaccination around COVID comes from a very small number of people. And they also dug pretty deep into a lot of accounts to try to understand people's behavior, which raised some red flags for people going, wait a minute, should you be digging into what you're digging into? Like, they started pulling people's personal profiles and info and their health preferences. They actually tracked millions of people's movements and behavior off their smartphones to see if they were following social distancing guidelines, all kinds of stuff that made people go, uh-oh, like Big Brother scooping in on us. But Facebook said it's a really small number of people who drive a very large narrative around vaccines, and that spreads. And Facebook acknowledged that they, as an agenda, they want to promote the use of the vaccine. So here's what's interesting, because a lot of the people who are resisting the vaccine aren't just anti-vaxxers. They're people who go, I don't know if I want to deal with side effects. I don't know what this vaccine might do to me. I'm concerned, and even had symptoms that they were not told they would have. Facebook has not ignored that. In fact, they acknowledged it and said, they had a concern that there's information that is clearly misinformation. And then there's information that is, as they called it, it's not misinformation. It's not misinformation if you say, I got a vaccine and the side effects were worse than they said. And Facebook acknowledged that's not misinformation. But they said they're concerned that the harm from what they called, quote, non-violating content could be substantial. And because in their mind, and they're not hiding it, they want to promote vaccinations. Whether you think Facebook should or shouldn't be in the business of doing that, Facebook's made no secret. We want to promote vaccinations. We're concerned that we can move misinformation off. But what about legitimate information that people are raising? Well, it's not misinformation. It's not violating content, but it does, by Facebook's own admission, create what they call a risk of substantial harm to their agenda of getting people to get vaccinated. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I don't think it's a good reason to block it, but it raised a serious question. Facebook's chief, I think it's his chief operating officer. Can we pop that up, Crafty? Said, chief product officer, Chris Cox, said in an interview, the company had taken viral false claims very seriously, but said there was a huge gray area of people who have concerns, some of which some people would call misinformation, and some of which other people would call doubt. That's interesting, right? In other words, what he's saying is there's a ton of stuff out there that some people might say is information, but some people would legitimately say that's not misinformation, that's doubt about the vaccine. Legitimate doubt for any number of reasons. It's not misinformation to have doubts. And Facebook acknowledges that. In fact, they went so far that their chief health officer, or I guess he's called the head of health for Facebook, wrote an op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle, what Facebook is doing to combat vaccine hesitancy. Because again, Kang Jin, Facebook doesn't pretend that they want to push people past hesitancy, as does the Biden administration. And I'm going to argue part of why they want to push people past it isn't because they're 100% sure there's no problems. It's because they feel like we got to take that risk because we got to get as many people vaccinated as possible because that's our best bet to end the pandemic. So here's what Jin had to say. Ultimately, getting vaccinated against COVID-19 is a personal decision, but everyone should have the ability to make an informed one based on information from experts. And social media can help. And then he says, I'm cutting out the middle. He says, but we are doing as much as we can to prioritize building trust in COVID-19 vaccines to help put this pandemic behind us. So there you got it. Facebook's not hiding that they want to promote it and not denying that, there's a lot of, doubt when people are raising doubt about that's not misinformation, but it does have a huge impact on making people not want to get the vaccine. 30% of adult Americans say they will not get the vaccine. You can't get to that 80% number if 30% say no. 50% of Republican men say they will not get the vaccine. Half of all Republican men. And again, doesn't get a lot of press. But a huge resistance to the vaccine comes in the Black community. The number of Black Americans who've been vaccinated is like 6% of the total. Mostly it's white people. Black and Latinos least number of vaccinations. Now, some of that is about access and getting them access to the vaccine, but some of it's not. Mayor Garcetti talked about how they're trying to take the vaccine to people in minority communities and give rides to people. Some of it's access, some of it's, accessibility. Some of it is there's a deep, deep, deep distrust and resistance, especially in the Black community, to the government around health stuff, right? And remember, it goes back, right? It goes back way back in the day, to the idea that the government used Black people to experiment with, with viruses and stuff, to the whole HIV thing. That distrust, whether founded or not, is deep. And there's a huge resistance on the part of a lot of the Black community to wanting to get vaccinated. So how are you going to get there if people are full of doubt and people don't want to do it? Well, you're not. But that's the reason why not having the conversation is so dangerous. You don't make people more likely to do something by simply telling them we're not going to let you hear or see anything that raises doubts about it. You only make them dig their heels in even more. Right? It doesn't change their behavior. And by the way, I travel a lot. Let me be honest. I see who's wearing masks and who's not. I'm in Florida. People always joke, people in Florida aren't wearing masks. Some are, some aren't. Spring break right now, got a whole beach full of people not wearing masks. But get to why that may not matter for them before we finish this episode. But I also see a lot of the people that I see, I got on a bus from Orlando to Jacksonville, and, half the people weren't wearing masks, and most of them were younger Black men and women who were just not wearing masks at all, and even though the bus said put them on, nobody really came around like the airlines and enforced it. But I see it all the time. I see, and again, is it a skepticism because the government tells you to do it? There's an inherent skepticism when the government orders you to do things. And that skepticism can be strong in Republicans, but it can also be strong in Democrats, and it can be strong in minority communities that have a history of distrusting what the government told them to do, even if they say it's in their best interest. So we've got a problem. If you want to get people vaccinated, you can't do it by telling people, don't talk about it. Don't say anything bad about it. Just go do it. It won't work. And here's why, because there are examples of where the vaccine doesn't appear to be working. So let me give you one example that popped up because it got a lot of attention. It has to do with the boxer, the legendary boxer. Sorry, I'm spacing on his name. Thomas. Oh well,
Hagler.
Thomas Hagler. Thanks, Crafty. There you go. I'm not a huge boxing fan, but Thomas Hagler was the middleweight champion for 8 years in a row, and an undisputed kind of legend in the sport. He died, and when he'd gotten the COVID vaccine, Thomas Hearns, who is another well-known boxer, a boxer who actually lost to Hagler. Can you put that up, Crafty, again? I want to just read what he said. Hearns said, "A true warrior, pray for the king and his family. He's in ICU fighting the after effects of the vaccine. He'll be just fine, but we could use the positive energy and prayer for his full recovery," which started an entire wave of people going, see, the vaccine doesn't work. See, the vaccine doesn't work. And I hate that thanks, Crafty. I hate that we focus on one single example and go ballistic. We do it on all sides of things. It's like one person doesn't prove anything. But then his wife came out and said he didn't die of complications of the vaccine. And nobody knows for sure because the whole thing got kind of misted up. Like she said he died at home, but they said he wasn't at home. And then Thomas Hearns came out and said, look, I wasn't trying to start an anti-vaccine movement here. I was simply saying he was in the hospital with, COVID, with an ICU, not with COVID, in the ICU with the vaccine and whatever, But it exploded this whole thing of people going, see, the vaccine doesn't work. See, it has side effects. And the point is, and this is what I'm going to get to, is these concerns and fears are real on people's part. And suppressing people's ability to talk about it doesn't make them go away. It just makes them go nutty when something does happen. Here's one that was indisputable. It happened in Utah, a 39-year-old woman who died after she was no issues, died after getting the second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. And the local news in Utah ran a news story about it. Just going to play the very beginning of it to show you how they set it up.
9 to 10. Okay, last week we brought you an investigation into COVID vaccine side effects and where to report them. During that investigation, we found 4 reported deaths filed by Utah families and their caregivers.
One particular case stood out to us, a 39-year-old single mom from Ogden with no known pre-existing conditions. Her family sat down with me this weekend as they were saying their final goodbyes. And while they're not against vaccines, they do believe information is power as we all make our own medical decisions.
So that's the point to me, right? The power of information to make your own medical decisions, which Facebook's, head of health acknowledged. It's personal choice for everyone. Giving more information helps. The idea of repressing people's ability to get that information, as I've said, will only make people more resistant. And you go, but they shouldn't be resistant. There's nothing to be afraid of. Biden came out and they said the vaccines are 100% safe. Okay, now here's where I'm going to take issue. You can't tell me that. You can't possibly tell me that. And I'm not a doctor. I am not a scientist. But I made an entire documentary that was very well received that was about kids who had a deadly genetic disease called spinal muscular atrophy. And the only solution to save these kids, their bodies could not produce protein. Their bodies, so the bigger they get, the weaker they get, because the gene that made protein made no protein. So they start out fine, and as they get bigger, a year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, they get weaker and weaker till they eventually die. What a horrible, horrible way to watch your kid die. We've made a documentary following these kids and following the process as several of the mothers lobbied to get the FDA to fast track an approval of a genetic exosense technology. It wasn't a vaccine, but it was like that. It was something that got injected in, epidermal in their back and essentially altered their genes. So I do know a bit about this, and I know a bit about the FDA and a bit about how these processes happen. So just so you get it, the first 2 vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, are not traditional vaccines. Johnson & Johnson's a traditional one. Pfizer and Moderna, the reason they could make those vaccines so fast was because they used a process called RNA messengering. So they actually, the RNA messenger is the sort of the thing that controls the call to make protein through the DNA. So it directs it. And being able to use this kind of gene-based technology, which they've been studying for years, allowed them to hyper speed the process of developing that vaccine. That's why it could happen so fast. But at the same time, what they were doing was creating, at some level, an experimental vaccine. They have no idea for sure how it would work or if it would work. And when we made this movie, Magnificent Burden, we saw the same thing. These kids were going to be tried in a trial with a life-saving drug if it worked, but they didn't know the side effects. And the pharmaceutical companies and the FDA and leaders in Congress in both parties acknowledged it to me. Our fight was to get the FDA to approve it because these kids were going to die. So it's like, let them have it. Who cares if it doesn't work? It's the alternative is it doesn't work. They die. So if it does work, they live. If it doesn't, they die anyway, a horrible death. And we won that battle. We got the FDA to fast track and approve this exosense technology drug. And, the head of, communications or public affairs at FDA called me on Christmas Eve and was like, Rob, you did it. We did it. It's done. It's fast tracked. These kids can get it. My point is, it was a huge risk. The doctors, the scientists, everyone was saying, we're putting this drug in kids and we hope it works. This is no different. They do not know for sure what will happen long-term with this. They know it has efficacy, but they can't know. They can't know because they haven't had time to know. That's not anyone's fault. They shouldn't be able to know because they just created it. And it's not a traditional vaccine like Johnson & Johnson. So they can't know for sure what side effects would happen down the road. It's humanly impossible. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't get the vaccine, but it does mean they should acknowledge that. And they won't acknowledge that. Why? Because they're terrified if they acknowledge that, no one will get it. But at the same time, people are smart and they figure it out and they go, I don't know, put something in my body you just developed, the gene altering. I don't know if I want to do that. And you go, but you should, because it will save you from getting the virus. And that's where they're wrong. So the former CDC director, Thomas Frieden, was on with Wolf Blitzer today. And he said, look, we got to be really careful. Even as people get the vaccine, we got to be really careful. I mean, don't want to move too fast. Like, they're getting the vaccine, but, the CDC doesn't really want people to take it, move too fast once you have it. And I'm thinking, I saw a dad and his two kids riding a bike today. And the dad had one kid on and the other little kid behind him. And I was in a car and they swerved around the road and moved out of the way. And I thought, the dad's got a helmet on the kid. He's keeping an eye on the kid. But at the end of the day, you can't protect that kid ultimately. The only way you protect that kid from falling down on a bike and breaking his nose or breaking his leg is if you don't let him ever get on a bike. Don't ever let him do anything. It's like, and parents who do that. They don't want their kids to do anything because they're afraid they'll get hurt. Now, you can keep your kid out of the street so they don't get run over. But at a certain point, that's what we're kind of doing. It's like, even if you're vaccinated, don't do anything. And, we're not going to be able to have small gatherings at 4th of July. FYI, President Biden, as I said the other day, Pennsylvania just announced that they're going to open everything up on April 1st. A huge, Democrat state. Connecticut, blue states are opening up. They're not waiting, that means they're going to have stadium stuff and, they're going to have 75% capacity in restaurants. People aren't waiting till July 4th to have a little barbecue get together with friends. People are moving. They're going. So the goal, they're like, well, they know that. So they're like, how do we get the vaccine out fast enough? How do we speed it up? How do we make it happen? Well, here's the problem, right? The problem is that the numbers don't stack up with what they're trying to do, right? And they can't admit mistake. I'm going to show you a couple little charts. The first chart is a study of sort of a flow chart of deaths related to the pandemic. Just pop it up for a second, Crafty. So these are age-adjusted deaths compared to normal deaths. And what you see in yellow is Florida and Sweden. And if you look to the left a little bit, you'll see California way up high over there, the far left, or not the very far left. That's New York and then California. Both Florida and New York and California have higher per capita deaths than Florida and Sweden, both of whom, and Florida's just above the average number of deaths, that blue line there. Thanks, Crafty. So the point of that is that for whatever reason, thanks, Crafty. Okay, we can take that down, Crafty. Okay, I'll take it down myself. It seems stuck. Hey, Crafty, can you take the graphic down? Are we there or am I frozen? Crafty? Guys, apologize for this. Bear with me. Right on a roll here, guys. Bear with me. Try to get this thing to go away.
Keep going, Rob.
Can you take the graphic down, Crafty? Thank you. All right, guys, back in. Sorry. Right in the middle of a great rant. Nothing like having a graphic stuck on your face. I'm never going to put a graphic up again. So my point is the lockdowns clearly didn't work and nobody knows why. I'm not saying they didn't think they'd work, but the numbers don't add up. Again, it's okay to have that debate. Was the science wrong? I don't know. I know people who got COVID who never left their houses. They don't know how they got it, right? All I know is people ask questions when what they see empirically in front of them doesn't make sense. They don't care what you say the science says. They care what their own what their own experience tells them, which could be good or could be bad. The problem is this: it's not just overall numbers of deaths. When you look at the actual way COVID's death rate was, it tells you something important. I want to show you a chart. Can we pop that chart up, Crafty, just for a second? Okay, so sorry, this first. This is the CDC's guideline for unvaccinated people, that they are able to meet with people who are at low risk because they're vaccinated. Okay, thanks, Crafty. So you're able to meet with people who are vaccinated, if you're vaccinated, with people who are at low risk. I'll get to why that matters. This is the total number of COVID deaths in 2019 as of March 3rd, of the 585,000 deaths. This is right before we hit that number, so it's 494,000. Okay, thanks, Crafty. Here's the stunning thing about these numbers, you guys, okay? 80% of those deaths, 80% were over 65. 96% were over 50. 96% of the people who died of COVID were over 65, were over 50 years of age. But here's what's even more stunning. You know how you'd hear the news about somebody who died of COVID who was young and national news, perfectly healthy 20-year-old. 200 people in the United States have died of COVID who are under 18. 200. 200 teenagers or kids have died of COVID. That's half the number of teenagers who committed suicide in the past year. That's half the number of under 18 who died of the flu 2 years ago. 200. If you're 18 or under, 200 people of the 500,000 were kids. No wonder kids feel safe. And when you look at the numbers overall, the total number of people under 30 that died of COVID was 2,000. So if you're under 30, 2,000 people died of COVID total. Why would you feel you're at risk? You're not. 2,000 people out of 500,000 across a country in a year of a pandemic were under 30 who died. If you're under 30, you're like, I got a way better shot of getting hit by a car. I got almost a better shot of getting struck by lightning. And the numbers aren't that different when you look at under 40. It's 7,000. The bottom line is the vast majority, 80% of COVID deaths, 80% were over 65, and 96% were over 50. So what does that tell you? It tells you this. People are going to resist getting the vaccine if they are younger because they don't want to take the chance. They don't want to go, I don't know what side effects this thing might have. And they're not crazy to wonder. As I said, I've been in this world. They're not crazy to wonder if there might be some side effect. And the pharmaceutical companies absolutely 100% know that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get it if you're at risk. But if you're young and healthy, you'd be like, why would I even take that chance? The odds of me getting COVID are literally, imperceptible. 2,000 people died of COVID who are under 30. I'm not going to be one of 2001. Like I said, I'm more likely to have a drowning accident. So I'm going to take my chances. I'm going to take my chances. If I get sick, I get sick, and I'll live with it. That's what young people are saying. You're not going to change their minds with all the propaganda in the world because they instinctively know they're safe and they can look and see that they are. So they're not gonna. They're just going to be like, no, why would I take that risk? But if you're over 65 or if you have an underlying condition, you have every reason to take that vaccine. It's a lifesaver for you because you have a very high likelihood of the 50,000, 96% of the people were over 60, were over 50. 80% were over 65. So good reason to take the vaccine. So here's my solution. Why don't we, instead of living in this crazy, everybody has to stay locked down, and on the 4th of July, we can have small get-together barbecues, or everybody has to get vaccinated, and we're going to block any information that might make you feel like you shouldn't get vaccinated, and we're going to take it away. What if we just made a focus? We are going to vaccinate every single person over 65. We're going to vaccinate every single person over 65. And we can make you, if you absolutely don't want it, but we are going to push so every single person over 65 can get the vaccine. And if you once you have it, you don't have to have it, you can say no, but we're going to push to have you get it. And once everybody over 65 is vaccinated, open the entire country up. Literally open it up. No more restrictions, no more BS. Vaccinate the at-risk population. If you want to go, okay, that's not enough. Vaccinate everyone over 50. That's 96% of all COVID deaths. And you've already got herd immunity happening. And then open the entire country up and let people get back to their lives and be honest about the realities of what we're facing. Because right now, as much as I think a vaccine is a good thing, and especially in people who are at risk or older need to have it, this attempt to silence anybody from having doubts or to say you can't see it a different way, you can't say lockdowns, that is simply going to make people more and more resistant who are already resistant. And when 30% of the people are resistant, you're doing something wrong. So like I said, vaccinate everyone over a certain age and then open the country up, acknowledge that that's what actually will work. And it would. I'm Rob Nelson. Thanks for watching.